everyone, welcome back to my channel. This is Heidi from My Reading Life, and I'm here today to film a recent reads video. So it is March the 17th. Happy St. Patrick's Day. If you celebrate St. Patrick's Day, I am wearing green today because, you know, that's what you do. You wear green on St. Patrick's Day. And I do have two books by Irish authors to mention today, which is perfect if you're looking for inspiration for something to read for the Irish Readathon. So that's just a little preamble here. These are books that I've read in the month of March so far that I have yet to talk about on the channel, and or are not Book 2 Prize books, which I've read 3 of in the month of March. Just finished my last Book 2 Prize for this Book 2 Prize book for this round this morning, so won't be talking about those other than to briefly mention one of them. But these are books, the books that I will be discussing are books that I've read outside of that project. So let's just get to it and get started. The first book is a book that I read for my Octavia Butler reading project. So I want to read all of the books that Octavia Butler has written. This is the first one in the Patternist series, and I believe it was first published in 1980. And it's a prequel to the Patternist series, which I think first was published in the 70s. So this story, I actually listened to this on, I kind of combined it. I started listening to it on audiobook, and then I got really involved in it and wasn't going to have any time for audiobook listening, so I just sat down and read the last third of the book in one gulp. This is science fiction, and it takes place in colonial times, I would say, 1600s maybe. I can't remember for sure, but it's during the period of probably a little bit later than maybe 1700s, because this is takes place during slavery times. Let me just look and see if there's an actual date. Yes, it starts in 1690, and then I think it goes into the 1700s, and we're following a young woman called Anyawu and a man called Doro. And Doro is the first person we're introduced to. We're in Africa, and he has this feeling that he's feeling this feeling that's drawing him towards somebody elsewhere in Africa. And when he gets to this place, it's Anawu, who is somehow an ancestor of his or somehow related to him. And you're trying to figure out what's going on here. You don't really know, but there's some connection between these two, and they each have shape-shifting abilities. So, and once those are revealed, you sort of understand a little bit that you're dealing with some sort of alien race, whether it's sort of a race of godlike creatures or it's a race of actual aliens from space. You don't ever know. At least in this book, you don't ever know. But you follow these two characters across. Doro takes Anawu away from her tribe, away from where she's been living as sort of a healing woman for the last 300 years. She's had to disguise how long-lived she actually is, and she agrees to go with Doro away from her home in order to protect her family and to protect her ancestors. And they travel across the ocean to what is America. And through all of this, you're getting a view of slavery, of the slave trade, and what it means to be a slave through the eyes of these characters. Because Doro is all-powerful, and he sort of utilizes slavery as a way to mask what he's trying to do, which is basically eugenics. He's trying to breed a perfect person. And so this book really deals with ideas, like I said, of eugenics, of what is slavery, of what people are willing to do to be free, all wrapped up in this sort of science fictional universe where these characters have great powers. And it was heartbreaking and super fascinating and really readable, and I was totally drawn into this story, and I am very excited to continue on with the series. It is, as I said to Britta, a wild ride. Like, a lot happens in this story, and there's a lot of violence and terrible things happening to people, and some questionable choices made, and your ethics and your moralities are questioned as this story goes on. And I think Butler is doing a great job of sort of making you question your own values about a lot of things. So definitely recommend Wild Seed by Octavia Butler. Looking forward to continuing on with this series. The next book to talk about is a middle grade book that I read for middle grade March, and this is Starfish by Lisa Fipps. And this is the story of a young girl. She is, I believe, 11 when the story opens, who is a big girl. She's a fat girl, and this is the story of her life and what she experiences. This is a contemporary story. As the book opens, her best friend is moving away from their town to an entirely different state, and it's our main character is Ellie, and she doesn't know how she's going to be able to deal with school, where she is very, very bullied, really in a horrendous way, by not just the students, but also the staff do nothing to protect her. So she's like, how am I going to survive school without my best friend? And a young girl moves in next door who is, I believe, Mexican-American. And so Ellie's a little bit, like, I'm not letting down my guard. I don't want to, open myself up to this potential new friendship. So you get that storyline going. And then really the bulk of this story is how Ellie deals with the prejudice and bullying and just awful, hateful behavior from everyone around her, including her parents. Her dad is really her only ally in this, and even he has a lot of failures in this regard. But really, the most horrendous character in this whole book is her mother. And I was listening to this on audiobook as well. And should say it's written in verse, so it's a very quick read. I think it's only a few hours on audio, and I pretty sure I listened to this all in one day, or 2 days maybe. Anyway, throughout a lot of this book, I'm like, there's no way, like, no adults would be this hateful, especially no mother would be this hateful to her own daughter. She like puts things on the refrigerator about dieting and body weight and body size. She's trying to get her daughter, who's only 11, to agree to surgery, like gastric bypass surgery. Just abusive, horrible behavior in this book. So be aware of that if that's something that you don't want to read about. So the whole time I'm like, there's no way a mother would be this terrible. There's no way adults would be this terrible. And then there's an author's note at the end that says that this book is fictional, but is based on things that the author herself experienced growing up as a fat child. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe somebody would treat a child in the way that this child is treated. And so I'm glad I read this. I think it's a really important story to raise awareness for what fat kids go through, because fatness is still, I think, a characteristic that people feel free to bully other people about, even while they think that they're, so liberal and progressive in other aspects of their life. So yeah, very, it ends on a good note. I will say that it's an uplifting ending, but I think it is a very sad book, but it is also sort of a book that I think people need to be aware of how fat people are treated. And so it's very good for that particular, that particular message that the book's giving. I'm glad that this book exists in the world. Another audiobook I listened to this month is One Goal by Amy Bass. And this book is about refugees, particularly Somalian refugees that have moved to a town in Maine. So this is a nonfiction story about a soccer team that sort of brought people together and changed people's thinking in a small Maine town. So Lewiston, Maine it's a small city in the state of Maine, and it is one of the top per capita top places that refugees have settled in the whole country of the United States. So per capita, the number of refugees that have settled in Lewiston is like up there, one of the highest populations. And the other thing you should know about Maine is it's like 99% white in terms of racial diversity. It's very low racial diversity in the state of Maine. Lewiston is an interesting place because it is to the west of the I-95 corridor in a like southwestern part of the state of Maine. So it's not on the coast. It's not in the north. So it's sort of an area of Maine that isn't what you think about when you think about the state of Maine. And it was a mill town. And the population actually, in the early part of the 20th century, there were a lot of French-Canadian immigrants that came to that place to work in the mills because they were Catholic and they were being persecuted where they lived in Canada. And so they had heard about job opportunities available in this burgeoning mill town. And so they moved there and they were able to get jobs and sort of have their own community. And so there's this culture of refugee communities already in the town of Lewiston. And for some reason, a handful of these Somalian immigrants, or basically immigrants from the East Africa area, mostly Somalian, but other Muslim Africans from East Africa, a handful got to Lewiston, Maine somehow. And they sort of put the word out to other people from that part, that refugees that had come to the United States from Somalia and East Africa, that Lewiston was a great place to live. That, you know, that while it was cold and while it was really white, that there was a growing population of people who spoke their language and had their same cultural expectations, and they were forging ahead with a new life. And some of these refugees were coming from places like they had been settled in like Houston or Atlanta, Georgia, or other like really large metropolitan areas. And so they came, thousands of them came to Lewiston and really reinvented the downtown area of Lewiston, which is sometimes called by the nickname the Dirty Lou in Maine. Like, I have heard it called that myself, and I am not from anywhere near this part of the state. So this story follows several immigrant families over the course of like 6 or 7 years, and it particularly follows the story of one white soccer coach who brought a lot of these kids together into the high school soccer team, the Lewiston High School soccer team, which is a state sort of success story for how they brought a team together and took the team to the state championship. And so you're following sort of the through thread of this story that's bringing everybody together and sort of propelling the narrative forward is the story of this soccer team and how kids were brought together, and kids who had nothing, like had no money, no resources, like how this coach sort of learned how to coach a refugee population. And it was simply a wonderful story, but also an enraging story, like the prejudices and the harsh racial bullying that these kids experience, not only them, but their parents. Like, it was terrible to read about, but also that there was a lot of good things that happened, people coming together of all backgrounds to support this team and to support this community, I think really stands out in a state that was not a place that refugees like would be normally coming to, right? Like, this is not a place you would send somebody from a warm climate, you know, and it was a really eye-opening story. I learned a lot from it. Plus, I love soccer. So if you like that sort of, if you like a sports story and you like a, you know, the hero's journey kind of a story with a sports team where a sports team overcomes great obstacles to be very successful, I think that One Goal certainly fits that bill as well, and is so it filled both thematic areas for me, you know, refugee stories, which I very much am interested in reading, and also sports narratives, which I also really love reading. So I think that it filled both those things. Plus, it takes place in Maine, and I was very interested in the history of Lewiston and how that town is rejuvenating itself through its immigrant population. So that was great. Now, the last two books that I want to mention are two books by Irish authors, so they would fit for the Irish Readathon. And the first is a literary fiction titled Trespasses by Louise Kennedy, which has recently been nominated to the long list for the Women's Prize for Fiction. So that's awesome for Louise Kennedy. This is the story of Cushla, who is 24 years old, living in Northern Ireland, I think Belfast, in the Troubles, the time period of the Troubles. She is a primary school teacher, and she also works at her brother's or her family's bar. Her brother runs this bar, and she works there part-time in the evenings to help out. Her dad has passed away, and so she lives with and takes care of her alcoholic mother. And so we're following Kushla's story as she is attracted to and begins a relationship with a much older man who is Protestant. Kushla is Catholic. And he is a much wealthier person, much more privileged person, and she, working class family, and of course the two religions that don't see eye to eye and all of that. And so you're following this. He's also married. Big important point. He's also married. So you're following this relationship. In the meantime, Kushla is having to deal with everything that is entailed by living in a place where violence is happening on the regular, where her students and her students' families are targeted by this violence and having to live with this violence. And so she's trying to, be a teacher, but also like help her kids, because they're young kids. She teaches like young kids, and she has a lot of empathy for what they're going through. And the sense of having to live with this violence day in and day out, and how it permeates everything that they do, is just so how oppressive that is. The book really has that, you really feel that. You feel that oppression, you feel that darkness, you feel that like sense of hopelessness and helplessness, and how are you ever gonna like make it through? How are you ever gonna help these kids like get to adulthood? And, it's as exasperated in her case, in Kushla's case, by her family situation. Her mom is not doing well. She's really struggling with alcoholism. Her brother is particularly unhelpful in this regard. And she has this relationship, like she is in love, and she has this relationship that she's trying to deal with. So it was a really good story. It reminded me a lot of books that I've read recently, like Milkman by Anna Burns, and books by I've forgotten her name. Factory Girls, Michelle Gellin, Michelle Gellin, Factory Girls in her previous book. But I will say that the Gellin books, while they reminded me of this because of the plot and the storyline and some of the themes, like this book has no humor. This is not funny, whereas the Michelle Gellin books are funny, and there's enough funny bits to sort of give you a chance to breathe. I felt very much like I couldn't catch my breath with this book. Like this book really is a tougher read because it is unrelenting in its look at what people had to live through at that time. So yeah, it was a good story. I'm glad I read it, but it is definitely a darker read. Speaking of darker reads, this is the final book that I read for the BookTube Prize. This is My Fourth Time We Drown, Seeking Refuge on the World's Deadliest Migration Route by Sally Hayden. I'm not going to speak about this any more than to tell you this, but Sally Hayden is an Irish author. She is a journalist, so if you're looking for another book to read for the Irish Readathon, this one would fit the bill, and it's nonfiction. So that's it. Those are the books that I've read recently in the month of March and haven't yet had a chance to talk about. I hope there's something that you find interesting. I hope you're doing well and finding great books to read, and I will talk to you later.